On today's Locked On Giants podcast, we hear from Gary Myers, former New York Daily News columnist, author, and Pro Football Hall of Fame voter, who's going to give us a little insight into the decision, or non decision as it were, regarding Eli Manning's Hall of Fame candidacy. That is coming your way next here on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia, Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all my written work. And as always, welcome on into my Blue Crew community members, my everydayers, my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thanks so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And also, thank you for your patience. I know this episode is coming out a little later than we usually put out the episodes, but sometimes you have to wait for good things to happen. And I'm very fortunate on this show that something good happened. I was able to get Gary Myers to come on the program. Gary Myers, of course, is a former New York Daily News columnist. He is an author, an NFL historian, a tremendous individual. I really have a lot of respect for him. And he's a Hall of Fame voter. So I sat down with him and I asked him a bunch of questions about what went into the committee's decision, the discussions and all that good stuff about Eli Manning's Hall of Fame candidacy. So that is what's going to be on today's program. And today's program, by the way, is also brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there is no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. All right, let's get right into my interview with Gary Myers, Pro Football Hall of Fame voter, former Daily News columnist, NFL historian, and author. There's a lot to cover and a lot of good stuff, so do check it out and let me know what you think. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm Patricia Traina, your host, and joining me on today's program is Gary Myers. He is a retired New York Giants sports writer, columnist for the Daily News. He's currently an author, and he is a member of the Pro Football Hall of Fame voting committee. He's here to talk about, what could he be here to talk about? Some guy named Eli Manning, right? Gary, good morning, and thank you for joining me.
Hi, Patty. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. I know a lot of Giant fans are upset about the Hall of Fame decision about Eli Manning. And Gary, I have to start, before I get into whether it was a surprise, which I suppose it wasn't, one thing I have to get out of the way. I know a lot has been said about the change in the rules of the for the Hall of Fame voting. Can you just clarify, because there seems to be some misconception out there that that had something to do with Eli's candidacy?
This year, they did change the rules, but it had nothing to do with Eli not making it this year. And I'll explain that. We start off with a list. There's a list of about 150, and they have a screening committee this year for the first time that narrowed it down to 50. So the first time we get our hands on a list is 50. And then as the 49 members of the committee, we then vote it down to 25. And then we vote it down to 15. And the 15 who make it are the ones that we discuss in our annual meeting as a group. Just as in years past, we voted from 15 down to 10. In previous years, we then take the 10 and vote it to 5. And then when we get to 5, it's yes or no individually on each of the 5. And if you get 80% of the vote, you're in. So they all can get in, or none can get in. If that was the case, then they would take the guys with the greatest number of votes. But That usually when you got down to the 5 and you vote on each one individually, you get 80%, you're in. Usually it was 5 for 5. That was kind of a formality. This year, when we got to 10, instead of voting it down to 5, we voted it to 7. And then once we got to 7, they said, pick your 5. So the 7 were now competing for 5 spots. And you still needed 80%. Well, as it turned out, as we saw at NFL Honors, only 3 modern era candidates were selected. That means they either only 3 got 80%, or potentially only 2 did, and because the minimum class was going to be 3, they took the third player with the greatest number of votes. They don't tell us that. So if it was 4, then we know they all got 80% because then there would be no reason to pull anybody up. I hope I'm being clear on this, that out of the 7, only 3 got enough votes to get in. I was very surprised by that. I thought it would be at least 4, and I also thought there was a good chance it would be 5 in years past. So that was kind of shocking to me. The reason it didn't impact Eli, and this will surprise people, is that Eli didn't make the cut to 10. So the rule never came into effect with him. It would have only come into effect if he made the cut to 10, then made the cut to 7, and then from that point forward, the rules changed from last year to this year. And the reason they did it was to try to make it even more selective by making it harder to get in. And I think it had something to do with Dion being pretty outspoken a couple of years ago that it's supposed to be the best of the best, and that the parameters had changed and it was too easy to get in, which I totally disagree with. There's only about 350 players in the Hall of Fame out of the 100 years that the league has been in existence. So, and the Hall of Fame's been around since the early 60s. I just don't agree, but whatever the reason is, the board of directors changed the voting procedures to make it harder to get in. But just as far as, and I've seen this, on social media, that Eli was hurt by the voting changes. I can tell you unequivocally, absolutely not true this year, because he didn't make it far enough in the process to be subjected to the new voting procedure.
Thank you for that explanation, by the way, because I know that was a big misconception floating around on social media. Two-part question for you, Gary. Were you surprised that Eli didn't make it to the final 10? And what do you think was the biggest argument against him?
Yeah, I mean, I was shocked, really. We had our conversation. Bob Glauber, used to be at Newsday, makes the presentations about the Giants, and I do it for the Jets players. But after Bob makes his presentation, and he did a fantastic job, anybody can speak up. So after he's finished on Eli, I knew what Bob was going to say, so I prepared material to supplement what he was doing, and I think between the two of us, we laid out a very, very strong case for Eli. The negative about Eli was, okay, he was 117 and 117. He never got an MVP vote. He never made All-Pro. People were just pointing out the negative and then saying, well, it was the defense, both times they won the Super Bowl, overlooking the fact that the Giants were first a 10-6 team and then a 9-7 team the second time. And obviously, and because you were there, they did not have a dominant defense over the course of either one of those seasons. The defense played great in both Super Bowls against a historically great offense with the Patriots, but those defenses couldn't be on the field. Maybe 1 or 2 guys could have started on the 86 Giants defense. It was not a great defense, but they were saying that, Eli was basically carried to those championships by the defense, which is entirely incorrect for anybody who watched those playoff runs and the last 2 minutes of both of those Super Bowl games. But then they say, well, he was a mediocre quarterback because he was only 117 and 117. And I'm saying, well, wait a minute. If you're saying the defense carried them to the Super Bowls, why are you blaming the 117 and 117 record on Eli? You can't have it both ways. Either he was responsible for the Super Bowl victories and he was responsible for only being 117 and 117, or the defense won the Super Bowls, but defense was mediocre to the point that Eli couldn't overcome it, and that's why he had a 500 record. You know, but it was like hitting our heads against the wall, that there was enough pushback that, and I don't know whether it was simply because people didn't look at him as a first ballot Hall of Famer. And there are people that have that standard that only the best of the best of the best should be first ballot. My standard is only the best of the best of the best get in the Hall of Fame. I don't care what year, how many years you've been on the ballot, because it doesn't say on your bust how many years it took you to get in. It doesn't say on Harry Carson's it took him 13 years, or on Michael Strahan it took him 2 years, or on Lawrence Taylor it only took him 1 year. It says their name and the years that they played. So how many years you've been eligible doesn't matter to me if you are one of the 5 best, because that's ultimately what we wind up voting on at the end. If you're one of the 5 best candidates in a particular year, I'm voting for you. I don't care how many years you've been eligible. But that argument was used that, when you look at Eli Manning, you just don't look at him as a first ballot Hall of Famer, which might be encouraging for future years, that now that the first ballot won't be attached to his resume, that maybe people will consider him and give him stronger consideration than they did this year.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are some of your relationship green flags? We often hear about the red flags we should avoid, but what if we focus more on identifying the positive signs in our relationships, those green flags? If you're not sure what they look like, therapy can help you identify them, actively practice them, and even embody that green flag energy yourself. Whether you're dating, married, building a friendship, or just working on yourself, therapy can help you form relationships that love you back. Therapy helps you develop healthy boundaries and improves your communication skills. It empowers you to set clear expectations and express your needs in relationships. Therapy also provides tools for managing conflicts in ways that strengthen your connections rather than breaks them down. And BetterHelp makes it easy by offering online therapy with over 30,000 licensed therapists to choose from. And if you need to switch therapists, you can do so at no extra cost. So go on and discover your relationship green flags with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Hey, Giant fans, if you're looking to join an exclusive community of Big Blue Faithful where you can discuss the team and receive inside information in a toxic-free environment, then you need to check out the Locked On Giants Blue Crew community. Members get access to our exclusive by invitation only Discord channel where we can talk with one another, ask questions, get breaking news, and so much more. Plus, as part of the Locked On Giants Blue Crew, I text exclusive updates and info directly to your phone, and you can communicate with me via text. Come see what it's all about with a free 14-day trial. And when you use our promo code BLUECREW, you will get your first 2 months after your 14-day trial ends at 50% off the regular monthly price of $4.99. If you don't like it, cancel before the trial ends and you'll owe absolutely nothing. For more information or to register, visit joinsubtext.com/LockedOnNYGiants, and don't forget to enter that promo code BLUECREW, BLUECREW, at the top of the page to get your 2-month discount at 50% off the regular monthly price for after your free trial ends. Text and data rates may apply. Please see your carrier's plan for details. Gary, people look at the results and they say Joe Namath had, not as strong credentials, Warren Moon, other quarterbacks didn't. Do you think that, when the committee gets together, and I realize that those guys were voted in by a different set of committee members, but do people take that into consideration, do you think, when they sit down to vote for the Hall of Fame candidates? Or is it because the game has changed so much that people say, what happened in the past is in the past?
Well, no, I definitely use comparisons to Warren Moon and Dan Fouts, who were both first ballot Hall of Famers. Warren Moon played on some really good Houston Oilers teams and never made it to a conference championship game. His record was 102 and 101. Dan Fouts, first ballot Hall of Famer, got to two AFC championship games and lost them both. His record was 86, 84, and 1, and over the course of his career, threw only 12 more touchdowns than he did interceptions. Both first ballot Hall of Famers. Eli threw over 200 more touchdown passes than Troy Aikman. 200. Troy Aikman, first ballot Hall of Fame. So, yeah, it's different eras, but it's not like Eli played on a pass-happy team in a dome or in warm weather. Played nearly half his career in Giant Stadium, which was the toughest stadium in the league to throw in. Didn't have the benefit of having all pro wide receivers for an extended period. You know, Burris was terrific for him, but unfortunately his Giants career at least was cut short by when he shot himself in the leg around Thanksgiving of 2008. I thought the Giants were going to repeat as champions that year. That was their best team of the Manning era, was in '08, and they kind of fell apart offensively after Burris did that to himself. And, you know, then he had Odell, who was kind of a shooting star, that he talked his way out of town and that hurt Eli because they never really replaced him. You know, I know he had Victor Cruz and Mario Manningham and Hakeem Nicks, all real good receivers, nobody that you consider to be an elite receiver. He had Jeremy Shockey for a while, but, you know, Shockey complained more than probably any receiver Eli had. You know, he'd embarrass him on the field by throwing his hands up in the air if Eli misfired. And Eli became much more accurate later in his career. Early in his career, you know, he'd be airmailing passes or throwing them in the dirt, you know, which frustrated Shockey, and Shockey showed that on the field. His offensive line, after the second Super Bowl, the Giants have had a horrific time, and it continues today, putting an offensive line in front of him that protected him. And they never had that. I compiled the numbers, I just don't remember it off the top of my head. Through 2012, Patty, his record was significantly over 500. And then from 2013 on, it was significantly under 500. If he had retired after the 2012 season, which would have been after 9 years in the league, and obviously it was not a consideration, but he had an excellent record, and at that point he had 2 Super Bowl MVPs. He would have been a no-brainer to get into the Hall of Fame. The second half of his career didn't measure up to the first half, and other than the last couple of years where I thought his skills had diminished and he'd become a little gun shy in the pocket because he had been hit so much, up until that point I didn't think it was his fault, what had happened after the second Super Bowl. Because I really think the Giant front office, Jerry Reese, Dave Gettleman, I think they let him down by not... kind of what happened towards the end of Belichick's run in New England. Belichick lost his touch in the draft, and I think that Jerry, who did a great job. I mean, the Giants had a lot of rookies that played on that 2007 team and had major contributions. I think that Jerry kind of lost his touch in the draft after that, and Gettleman looks good now for picking Saquon, but he never put an offensive line in front of Saquon during his Giants career that he could have had anything near the success that he's had in Philadelphia.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. The back half of that Eli's career, they let him down. It's, you know, the record speaks for itself, for sure. That said, Gary, you know, I saw where Ira Kaufman, one of your voting committee members, he was on Mad Dog Radio. He admitted he didn't vote for Eli, but he also added, I do believe that Eli will get in eventually. It's not like Eli's going to be able to go back and add to his credentials, that they are what they are at this point. Eli's going to be facing a little bit more stiff competition coming up. You got Drew Brees, Roethlisberger, Brady's coming up, Rivers, and if Rodgers retires, he's coming up. Do you believe Eli is now in for a long wait to get into Canton, and do you believe that eventually he will get in?
Yeah, I mean, I heard that comment by Ira, and that's the opposite of how I feel about like the eventually getting in. if you believe he's a Hall of Famer, vote for him. I don't think it would have been very hard to vote Eli to the final 7 this year, considering I didn't think it was the strongest class that we had to talk about. I think Eli stood out in this class. And when you see the guys that got in, did Eric Allen Eric Allen was an excellent cornerback, but this is like his 18th or 19th year on the ballot. You tell me Eric Allen had a better career than Eli Manning? Jared Allen had a better career than Eli? Antonio Gates was an excellent player, but what did he ever win? I think with quarterbacks, that's really important. As far as how long a wait, there's nothing that says we can't put 2 quarterbacks in 1 year. We've done it with running backs. We've done it with offensive linemen. We've done it with defensive backs. So it can happen. Drew Brees is the one that comes up next year, and I do think that he'll get in. And there are some other strong first ballot guys, but we had 5 first ballot guys this year, and none of them got in. So maybe there's just a feeling among the committee that unless it's like Peyton Manning or Jerry Rice, that enough voters feel that we're not voting anybody in the first ballot, on the first ballot. And maybe that's a Dion thing, where they're trying to make it tougher because of the things that Dion said. I don't know. Not everybody speaks up at these meetings. We got 49 people, and without naming names, there's more than a handful that you never hear their voice, other than when they take attendance and you say here or present. You never hear their voice. So Paul Zimmerman, the late great Paul Zimmerman, always used to say that there's a lot of committee members that you never know how they feel because they never speak up, and then they wind up voting no on a lot of candidates. And he called them silent assassins. And I think that he was right. And I wound up taking Paul's place on the committee after he got sick. And I remember just talking to Paul about it during the years that he voted, that about the silent assassins, because I used to say, what's going on? Why isn't George Young in? And what's the holdup on Harry Carson? And I used to hear about the silent assassins, the one that would be voting no, but you'd never know because they never said anything in the meetings. And I will say there were probably some silent assassins on Eli, but a lot of vocal assassins too. It was a pretty contentious discussion.
Can you tell me how long the discussion roughly ran? Was it the longest of the meeting this year?
Oh, it was definitely the longest. I actually meant to clock it to see how long it was. It was at least 40 minutes. It might have been even longer than that. I just don't recall, but it was definitely the most, how do I want to phrase this? It was definitely interesting. It was definitely contentious. Nobody was yelling at anybody, which was good. But there was a lot said in that meeting that I just totally disagreed with, and I made my feelings known. And at one point, I when I was stating Eli's credentials, 2-time Super Bowl MVP, beat Brady and Belichick, beat Rodgers and Favre at Lambeau in the playoffs, still holds the most passing yards for a single playoff season of any quarterback in NFL history. I said, what are we doing here? Because it was clear to me at that point he wasn't getting in. I said, just be honest. Is there an anti-Manning feeling? Is there, Manning fatigue like this Kansas City Chiefs fatigue now? Was there Lamar Jackson fatigue in the MVP voting? It's only happened 2 or 3 times now that a guy who didn't make first team All-Pro was voted MVP, with Josh Allen getting it over Lamar. So, I wonder if the fact that it's the Manning family and, they've been so successful and now the 2 of them are all over television. They're on every commercial. People, in the back of their minds, is there some resentment towards that? And you saw that with Brady during the course of his career. Tom Brady's the nicest guy. He's a genuinely good person who I always enjoy talking to. But the animosity towards him over the course of his career was mind-boggling. Was it because he was too successful, or is it because he was married to a supermodel, or was he too good-looking, or was he too good? But people went out of their way to try to knock down Tom, and maybe it's because he was an extension of Belichick, and a lot of people dislike Belichick. Well, what is it with Eli that really has caused people to be so negative? And I'm not even just talking about the voters, but and I try not to pay too much attention to, the Twitter mentions. I like reading it because some of it is just so outrageous and stupid. It makes me laugh. But there is a lot of animosity towards Eli, among fans, and not Giant fans, but just fans outside of New York who watched him play and just obviously were not impressed.
Hey, Giant fans, Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's icing on the cake. So go on and download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. Hey, Giant fans, the big game is almost here, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded, Prize Picks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. Here's how it works. Just pick more or less on at least 2-player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. Prize Picks even has a free pick for the big game where one of the starting quarterbacks only needs to throw for 1 yard to win. Pair that with one more correct pick, and you're cashing out. Check out the promos tab to tail any of the Super Sweet Millie winners' big game lineups. If you tail a lineup that goes 3 for 3, you can win a split of $1 million in promos funds. Download the app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. To that end, Gary, even though you and some of your colleagues on the committee covered the whole league, there were also writers that that specialized in the Cowboys or the Raiders or a specific team. They don't necessarily know the little intricacies of the careers of Eli Manning, even though he played in a big market. Do you think maybe that factored into some of the thinking?
Yeah, I think that the Giants played a lot of stinkers on national TV during the course of Eli's career. There were a lot of games during his career on national TV that he didn't play his best, or the Giants didn't play their best, and maybe people didn't see enough of Eli. But certainly in the clutch moments, going 8-0 in those 2 Super Bowl runs, I thought should have convinced people that if you play your best at the most important time and beat what would have been a historically great team in New England, been remembered the best single season team in NFL history if they had won that Super Bowl 42 against the Giants, and Eli took them down the field to get the winning touchdown. What else do you want from a Hall of Fame quarterback? Isn't that what the definition of a Hall of Fame quarterback is to rise to the occasion? And even like on the Tyree catch, Patty. Now, listen, that was a throw that he'd probably like to have back. The last thing you do is throw the ball down the middle of the field like that to a stationary target with 3 defenders around him. And Tyree made a catch that 1,000 times again he wouldn't have made that catch more than one or two more times. But prior to that, Eli did an amazing. Eli was not incredibly athletic, as we know. He wasn't very elusive. But what he did to pull himself away from Richard Seymour, a Hall of Fame player, and one other player whose name escapes me right now, as they were literally pulling on his jersey, and freed himself up, backpedaled, got himself set, and threw that ball to Tyree. I mean, just to the point before he released the ball, that was a tremendous play. Now you can argue maybe the whistle should have blown in the grasp, and the referee, Mike Carey, considered the moment and gave Eli an extra count before he was going to throw the flag for in the grasp. But whatever it was, that was a tremendous play. Fast forward 4 years, the throw to Mario Manningham was one of the great throws I've ever seen. Just in terms of, he was double teamed on the sidelines. The margin for error, or the window as we now call it, was the tiniest window. He couldn't have thrown a better pass if he stood right next to Manningham and just dropped it in his hands. And he did it. It was a 38-yard completion. Under the most pressurized situations from his own 12-yard line, where the Giants had to go down the field to score. I mean, what else do you want a quarterback to do? I know you'd rather him be 200 victories and 115 losses. Okay, fine. But he wasn't. But nobody is, except for Brady. I just don't think what happened in our meeting a couple weeks ago was fair. And I hope he doesn't have to wait too long, because I think he deserves it. And listen, I wrote plenty of critical columns about Eli during the course of... Patty, do you remember the game, the Thanksgiving weekend in 2007 against Minnesota? He had 4 interceptions and 3 pick sixes in that game. I remember my column in the Monday Daily News was, the Giants have to really think long and hard about whether this is the guy going forward. Because he was terrible in that game. And then I think it was like 2 weeks later, they clinched a playoff spot in that snow game in Buffalo. And then they played the Patriots tough in the final game of the 2007 season. I think I have my chronology right. That was a Buffalo game where they clinched in the snow. And then he had this tremendous... I mean, he beat the Bucs in the first round of the playoffs. All right, no big deal. The Giants were just as good as the Bucs, if not better, that year. But then he beat Romo and the Cowboys, who were the number 1 seed in Dallas. He goes in and plays in that frigid game in Green Bay. Favre is the one who looked like he had never played in the cold weather before. That might have been the best game of Eli's career, the way he threw the ball in the -23 wind chill. And then he goes and beats Brady and Belichick. I mean, I raised a question in the meeting, and I mean this in all sincerity. I want someone to ask Dan Marino if he'd switch careers with Eli Manning.
Wonder if he would, too.
Yeah, I mean, the second paragraph of everything about Manning's career is, about Marino's career. He's the greatest quarterback in NFL history who never won a Super Bowl.
And yet he's in the Hall of Fame.
And he only got to one Super Bowl, and they got blown out. And that was in his second year. And he never got back over the last, say, 17 years of his career, whatever that was, 15 years of his career. And he was the first ballot. Now, he was a great player. He was a better player than Eli. But he didn't have a better career than Eli, because I measure quarterbacks by championships.
So that being said, Gary, I mean, I'm assuming, and you tell me if I'm wrong, I'm assuming Bob is going to make the presentation again next year if Eli makes it to the final round. What else could be said to maybe sway some of these no voters to reconsider?
Yeah, excellent question. But not everybody gets in the first ballot, and then the presentation has to be made the next year and the next year and the next year. You just try to change it up a little bit and maybe come up with a couple different testimonials from coaches and players. Hope that people who objected to him simply on the grounds that they didn't think he was a first ballot Hall of Famer will have changed their mind and say, okay, as long as it's not the first ballot, I'll vote for him. I mean, that's why people get in after the first. Not everybody gets in the first time, but I mean, out of the 350 here, and I don't know how many were first ballot, but the overwhelming number were not first ballot Hall of Famers. So it can still happen, and you try to be creative with the presentations, and it becomes tough. Bob has even said to me, "Do you want to do the presentation next year, and I'll bat second, and I'll follow you up. We can switch it up." And I said, "No, you give it one more shot," because he really gave a great presentation. I couldn't have done any better than he did, so I see no reason for me to do it unless he just really feels that he'd rather go second, and then I'll do it. But there were guys that like Torrey Holt. We've heard Torrey Holt in that room now for at least 6 years, and I can't tell you what was different from one year to the next. I thought he had a good chance of getting in this year because he made it to the final 7. But these guys must have really just split the votes in a way that I didn't anticipate, because I'm shocked only 3 modern era guys got in.
And you don't know the final vote count. Like, you don't know how many voted yes, how many voted no for any given candidate, right?
No. All I know is who makes it to the next round. But in the past, I would know who the 5 are, because then we had a vote on the 5, like I explained earlier. We get down to 5 and then just vote yes or no. Now, I didn't know if any or all of those 5 got the vote. I just assumed, because they made it to the final 5 and they weren't competing against each other for a spot, you just had to vote yes or no, that people voted yes, which is, I don't remember a guy getting to the final 5 in the years I've been on the committee and then not getting in. But this year, all I knew until last night was who the 7 were. I had no idea whether 3, 4, or 5 got enough votes to get in. And I'm telling you, I was sitting on my couch last night watching it and having I knew Sterling Sharp had gotten in. That I did know. And I presented him in the senior meeting and at our main meeting. And I was really happy for him. He was a great player. But when I was sitting there watching NFL Honors last night, and I remember they had like the boards with the player, the action picture of the player. I'm going, and I saw how big the first one is. I go, boy, it doesn't look like there's room for more than 4 of those. Maybe they're digital and they'll flip out and you'll see 5, 6, and 7. And then when they did the 4, and that was it, I couldn't have been more surprised. Really, I couldn't have been more surprised, because I had no idea. And people didn't believe me that I had no idea. I didn't know. All I knew, and I've known for, middle of January is when we had our meeting. I've known since then that Eli didn't make it. And, I've had many, many people in the media ask me, and I said, I don't want to lose my spot on the committee, so I'm not telling you, And everybody understood that, but I didn't know who made it. In the past, I always knew. I didn't know this time.
Yeah. It sounded, as we got closer to the announcement, that Eli was going to have an uphill battle. But, look, if there's a bright side to this, maybe Eli and Tom Coughlin, who I felt should have been in the finalist round 2, maybe they go in together one year. That would be nice.
That would be really cool. And that's what I thought was going to happen this year with Sterling Sharp and Mike Holmgren. I thought that they would go in together. And I can't believe Holmgren didn't get enough votes. The way that one worked is we had 3 seniors, a coach, and a contributor, so 5, and they told us to vote for 3. I knew Sterling was getting in. I was positive that Holmgren was getting in. Nobody said anything negative about him, and we had a long discussion on him, and I'm telling you, Pat, it was 100% positive on Holmgren. I'm going, and the competition, it was Ralph Hay was the contributor, Maxie Bond, and Jim Tyrer. And I'm going, how can you not? I had a hard time finding a third person to vote for out of that after I voted for Sharp and Holmgren. I'm going, I can't believe Mike Holmgren didn't get 80% of the vote, because the 2 other seniors, Maxie Bond has been up for a lot of years, and we've discussed him, and he's never gotten the vote. And then Jim Tyrer, I don't know how familiar you are with his story, but He was one of the great offensive tackles in NFL history. But are you aware of his backstory?
Not really. I'd have to do some research.
So he was a finalist in 1980 and didn't get in. And the reason he didn't get in was because in 1980, he shot his wife and then committed suicide. And his family has since said that it was a result of brain damage from concussions. And, they're speculating that he had CTE. Nobody ever knew what CTE was back in 1980. So Tyra didn't get in 1980. I'm fairly certain the vote came after that horrific incident, but I'm not positive about that. But what I am sure about is that from 1980 to this year, he was never considered as a modern era candidate or a senior candidate. This documentary being made about Tyra and that whole situation. And in it, his children, his 4 kids, have become his biggest advocates to get in, saying that wasn't their father who did that. I mean, it was their father, but they're saying that wasn't the man he was. He was very, very sick, and that's why that happened. And that created enough momentum in the senior committee, which I'm part of, to get him vote him as one of the 3. And I voted for him in the senior committee because, and this is the only reason I voted for him, I felt this was a big enough issue that I wanted our whole committee to have a chance to discuss it. I didn't think it was just a 9-member senior committee should be voting on this, because the mandate from the Hall of Fame committee, Hall of Fame director and president, is you only consider on the field. Anything that happens off the field, be it Lawrence Taylor and his drug issues or anything that happens off the field, is not to be taken into consideration, including a man murdering his wife and killing himself. I thought that was too big an issue for just 9 of us to make a decision on that. That's why I voted for him. But I don't think he even came close, because even though they wouldn't let us discuss the specifics of that incident, you can just tell by the way people were just talking about it that he wasn't going to get in. So when it came down to vote for the 3 among the seniors, the coach and the contributor, I had a hard time finding a third person to vote for, but they told us we had to vote for 3. That's why I'm so surprised. That was my long way of saying I'm shocked that Mike Holmgren didn't get in, which pushes back Coughlin potentially. Mm-hmm. But considering that Bill Belichick, they changed the rule again on coaches. You only have to sit out 1 year instead of 5. Belichick is a lock next year unless the committee decides, let's wait a few years to make sure he doesn't come back to the NFL and coach before we put him in.
Yeah. Very interesting. The different opinions, the evolution of the rules. Gary, I really appreciate all your insight. I'm not going to lie, I'm disappointed Eli didn't get in. I know you, Bob Glauber, and some other committee members did your best to get him in. But people are going to be people. People are going to have their opinions. And I gather some people, and that's what makes our business so what it is. You have an opinion, you put it out there, and you stand behind it.
Yeah, I can tell you this. I talked to Eli a bunch prior to the vote, and I've just texted with him last week, because once I found out that he knew, I didn't want to be the one to tell him that he didn't get in. It wasn't my place to do that. But once I was told by somebody he definitely knew, I was texting with him. The thing about it, don't worry about Eli. As you know, Patty, nothing bothers Eli. I know how much he would have liked to have gotten in. I think he was realistic about the pros and cons of the argument, and I think he prepared himself mentally. But I know that he'd really like to get in, and for his sake, because I think he deserves it, hopefully for him it'll happen in the next few years. They doesn't have to wait too long.
Yeah, and it would have been special for him being a New Orleans native to make it down there. But, maybe, who knows, maybe the Super Bowl circles back to New Orleans and he gets in that year, again, with Tom Coughlin, which I think would be really, really special. So
I don't want to see him have to wait that long, because, in the Super Bowl rotation, New Orleans probably won't get it for another 4 or 5 years. So I really hope that he gets in before. But with Drew Brees next year and all the other quarterbacks that coming up, that it's going to be tough. But I think he's got the resume to eventually get the votes.
Fingers crossed. I sure hope so. And if he doesn't, he's always going to be a Hall of Famer in my eyes. That's for sure. Because I think he's worthy of it. So, Gary, thank you so much for jumping on with me to talk about all this stuff, sharing some insight. This was very informative. Folks, you can find Gary's books on Amazon wherever you buy books. He's got several great books out there that I highly recommend. Matter of fact, we'll put a link to his author page on Amazon in our show notes if you want to check out any of his fine works. He's Gary Myers, former New York Daily News columnist, author, Pro Football Hall of Fame voter, and an all-around terrific individual. I'm honored to know him and call him a friend.
Well, thanks so much, Patty. If I can just tell your listeners that I have a book coming out in September. It's called Brady versus Belichick, The Dynasty Debate, where I will settle the argument on who deserves more credit, Brady or Belichick.
Ooh, that's a must read. That is definitely a must read because I've often thought that Brady made Belichick, but maybe I'm not giving Belichick enough credit, but I look forward to that one for sure. All right, Giant fans, thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. We'll be back on Monday. We'll have more on the Eli Manning situation. We'll have a draft talk. We'll really kick into the draft talk again and a whole lot more here on Locked On Giants. For Gary Myers, I'm Patricia Traina. Have a great weekend, everybody, and we'll see you on Monday.